My name is Peter Koch. I'm a security evangelist working, of course, with security for a lot of large corporations in Denmark. Today's topic is cybersecurity. Cybersecurity with a focus on how to actually build a good security platform. But it all starts with risk. We do see a lot of people who tend to talk about security and to focus on the products, the firewalls, the endpoint protection, but it actually all starts with a risk and a risk evaluation, because that is what we aim at minimizing. Cyber risk is a lot of different things. Every day we are actually experience some kind of risk. If we click on the wrong web link and get infected, we have to maybe erase the machine or reformat it, and that is actually activating some costs. That is a risk. So the more you do that, bigger the risk. Then we see the larger risk when somebody manages to get into the installation and maybe compromise or encrypt all your data on a file server. That is also a risk. It's a little bit bigger from an economical perspective, the cost of mitigating that risk. So cyber risk is actually a sum of a lot of different things that happens when somebody breaks into your infrastructure. Maybe you have a data breach and you'll be fined for having breached personal data. That is also a risk. So it's a sum of a lot of different things happening with different probabilities, but also with different loss. So you have some very low hanging fruits, very low probability, very low risk. You will have something with very low probability and unimaginable risk or loss. So take it if Microsoft suddenly, the whole Azure or their cloud environment went down, that will incur a lot of risk to a lot of big corporations. So that's the curve. So our objective is actually how do we minimize the risk we see on the curve. And that risk is actually increasing. While we are building out our digital life form, we are being more and more depending on the digitalization. We also see the risk is actually increasing. And of course, in a wartime like we're in now, we also see the risk is actually going up. The number of attacks is growing and the consequences of the attacks are growing. So that's the risk picture that we are dealing with. So to deal with the risk, we are using controls. So this is where the security part actually comes in. And I don't talk security, I talk controls. So risk minimization, we achieve that through proper deployment of controls. Can we eliminate all risks? No. There will always be some kind of residual risk, either because the adversaries are more creative, they invent new ways of getting in, you leave more gaps open or so to the infrastructure so they will get in. And there's another point is that it will probably be too expensive to eliminate all risks. It doesn't work that way. So you will end up in a situation where you have an accepted risk or residual risk. That is the risk that the board of directors or the management team has accepted that this is a consequence of running a business. So what we want to use or achieve with our controls is actually to minimize the big sum of risk to a level that is manageable and acceptable from management. And how do we do that? So first of all, there are certain frameworks or regulations, laws, that actually set some kind of standards or standard requirements what you need to do. So for instance, we have the GDPR, which deals with privacy, private data. We have DORA, which deals with how the financial industry should actually connect and interconnect and have some kind of operational resilience. And we have the NIS2, which is actually the new directive coming up that stipulates that customers within essential and important industries, companies that are critical to a society's infrastructure, that they actually upgrade their infrastructure to be more secure. So some of the requirements on security actually comes through the laws, directives, regulations from public sectors. Those are not control frameworks, those are laws, and built into those laws are requirements of how you should actually improve your security. So going from the laws, you need to dig into a standard framework. You need to have some kind of structured way of approaching and solving the requirements that are stipulated in the laws. For that purpose, you use three different things. You use a program framework. That's an overall framework that sort of defines how do you actually build security. How do you set up the organization? How do you build physical security? How do you build your technical security to withstand the attacks or protect your infrastructure? After that, you have a risk framework. That is a standardized approach how to actually evaluate the risks, like the curve we saw just before. So that's where you get a structured approach to what should I do to actually get an overview of my current risk scenario. And part of the risk scenario is also defining what is it that is really at risk. What are my critical assets? What are the important systems that I cannot live without? Or what are the important systems that are actually delivering services to the society, like utility, electricity, heating, building controls, and so forth. So that is part of defining the risk. Not everything in a company is at risk, and not everything really has a big risk if it goes down. So it is a judgment, and that is part of the risk work. And the last part is really, after you have defined the risk, is really to dig into the control framework. And those are typically frameworks that stipulate how should I build good security. So it states controls saying you need to do this, you need to do that, and you need to do this order, and you need to do with this priority. So this is really your prescriptive foundation for building a good security. And there are different types of program frameworks and control frameworks. One example, especially for the European, we are very driven on ISO, International Standards Organization, and for security, it's very much the 27001 that is the sort of the standard in the industry. There are also some additional best practices supporting those controls. One is 27002, and another one which is widely and also seeing a growing use in the market is actually the CIS Controls, Center of Internet Security. This is a non-profit organization that has developed a control framework that a lot of companies, auditors, and other organizations are more and more leaning towards because it is easier to work with, it's easier to understand. So that is the part of the journey, selecting your program framework and then selecting your control framework as well as the risk framework. So if you look at this as a programmatic approach and more structured way, you have a cybersecurity program, you define what are the objectives of the program, what should the leadership of the company do, what is their responsibilities, and then you lean towards some kind of program framework and a control framework. And those actually work together. And last but not least, of course, and as an outcome is you set your policies. Policies for your cybersecurity is actually the management's way of communicating where is it that we want to go with our security and why and how. So that is the overall policy, and part of that is also the instructions with some more detailed instructions on how should I build security. Where the big policy framework is for everybody in the company to understand where are we, where is it that we want to go with the security. The instructions are more detailed. They might be meant for the operations, they might be meant for the monitoring service, it might be meant for HR, it might be meant for other parts of the organization. More detailed instruction on how to build the security. And as stated here, there's an ISMS. This is also a recommendation. Information Security Management System. The idea is that building a good security platform actually requires a lot of different things, and it actually requires maintenance. So part of it is actually put it into a system and put some power into the overall work with security. So ensure that you have recurring processes and procedures in place, that you revisit the controls maybe quarterly, maybe every 6 months, or maybe annually, so that you make sure that the controls are still living in the organization, they are updated, and they're working the way they should. So that is the programmatic approach behind building good security. And I must say, a lot of companies, they jump this. They go directly to buying a firewall without knowing what controls they do. They buy some kind of silver bullet that they have been told it does everything and it does wonders. But you need to have a more programmatic and structured approach to this. This will also clear the way for better security. So as an example on this is, we do see the most common ways is actually using the ISO 27002 as the guide for implementing security measures. And there's a lot of companies also using the CIS Controls, and this right now is version 8.1. And these are the main differences. One of the reasons why we see the CIS Controls gaining momentum is that they are actually more practical, they're very tactical. So asking the operations in a company to build security and manage security, they understand the language much better with the CIS Controls. And another thing is that it's actually prioritized. So if you are having scarce resources, budget, then it's good to lean up towards this framework that actually tells you where should you start and where should you end. So that is a good guide for prioritization. So CIS version 8 is actually 18 controls covering different topics. They're covering the topic of inventory of hardware. What hardware do you have on your network? And hardware is a broad term. It's not only PCs and servers, it's also network components, it's mobile, it's handheld, it's laptops, it's printers, it's proximity alarms and web cameras. Everything you put on a network should be part of your inventory. And inventorying that is very important. The idea is that if you don't know you have it, how can you protect it? So we start with getting an overview and a visibility into what we actually have, because then you can start building the right protection. Same goes for software. That's control number 2. That is knowing all the software you have. This is a complex task, and I must say, if you look at these controls, they sound simple, but they are very tough to handle. But they are the fundamental. You cannot protect what you don't know you have, and that's it, basically. And we do see a lot of different organizations jump past 1 and 2 and 3 and take those vital controls and jump to the more like, I need a firewall. That's actually control number 13, so that's further down the priority, so maybe they should start in another way. I would like to drill a little bit down into number 4, which is about secure configuration. If you look at adversaries and how they actually build their attack plan and how they create persistence within the organization, they usually use the lack of good configuration policies within the organization. So we do see customers that takes a window, installs it on PC, and then off they go. But that leaves a lot of different doors open for the attackers to get in and gain persistence within the organization. So having a control of your configurations across servers, applications, clients, and whatever you put on a network is actually a good cyber hygiene practice. And it's actually free. There's nothing to pay except for the labor cost of actually making it happen. But otherwise, it's actually yourself that builds the security. Our experience, though, is that people don't do it. And it's sort of built, we spend a lot of money on other security measures, and then we don't spend any time on building the whole foundation that those security measures should actually build upon. I'm not going through the 18, but there are 18 controls, and in total there are 153 sub-controls. So there are different sub-controls to each control area that sort of stipulates more what should you be doing. And that is the power of the CIS controls. They're very prescriptive. Do this, do this, do this, do that. I'll come back to another area of the CIS control, why they are good to work with. Up front, the CIS organization has also separated the CIS controls, the 153 controls, into 3 implementation groups, so making it even easier for companies to start out the journey. So they've been looking at what should an SMB, so small medium business, how should they target their work with cybersecurity. They look at a medium to large company, and they look at a very critical company. Also trying to take into consideration, does this company have their own security department? How many people do they have that attend security and so forth? So they're broken into 3 implementation group 1, 2, and 3. And that's also a way to choose a level of security. I'll come back to this later, the impact of these different implementation groups and what the result of it is. But this makes it much easier to work with the CIS controls because you know what to do and how much you need to do. So this is an example. This is CIS control number 11, a data recovery, very relevant, especially when we talk ransomware, because if somebody has taken your data as a ransom, it's always nice to know that you don't have to pay because you have a good backup of your data. The problem nowadays is that those adversaries, they are good at also encrypting your backup. And that is why especially the control 11.4 is important. You need to have establish and maintain an isolated instance of recovery data, not on your network. So having a complete copy somewhere else different. So if somebody encrypts your data and takes your data as a ransom, you don't have to pay to get them because you know you have them. So that kind of certainty is, I would say, the last resort when you've been ransomware. You don't have to pay. Of course, ransomware leaves a lot of other problems for a period of time. You don't have access to your real data. You need to recover and so forth. There's a cost associated with that. But otherwise, that proves the importance of having a good recovery system. And again, make sure that you have a classification of data, that you have a prioritization of data, which data are really sort of the crown jewels of my infrastructure. Those are the ones that needs the hardest protection. Another example is coming back to the inventory and control of enterprise assets. Again, a very prescriptive way. You need to establish and maintain an accurate and detailed inventory of what you have on your network. Who's the owner? What is the asset? Where does it sit? What's the address of the asset? Who owns the asset? What department owns the asset? And that actually needs to be done for every type of asset you have. Even those connecting remotely, like if you have a handheld where you are having access to the company's mail system, you need to have it in the asset inventory. So if you have employees that don't have handhelds or they don't have mobiles or they have a private mobile, then you don't use it for company purposes, then that's okay to leave out because they're not a risk to the infrastructure. But otherwise, everything that connects into something that is owned by the company, remotely or directly, should be actually in the asset inventory. And then it deals a lot with about authorization. So you authorize these assets, and if you monitor for unauthorized assets, the whole idea is that if you find unauthorized assets, you actually disconnect them somehow. I won't dig into details of this further than that. But as said before, there are 18 of these controls and there are 153 sub-controls. In this case, control number 1 has actually 5 sub-controls that in a very precise language describes what you should be doing. Coming back to the implementation groups and the whole idea of building good security, one of the things that the CIS controls does very, very well is actually mapping between different control frameworks, but also mapping what is it that we are protecting. How do we measure what we do against the attacker's way of working? And usually attackers, it's not that they are completely stochastic in the way they work. They actually work out of a plan. We call it an attack kill chain. And that's the one we can see under this attack with a different team. Typically it starts with initial access and so forth. So the idea is that if we can stop the attacker in any steps of his attack plan, then we have actually won the war. And in this scenario, we have taken the CIS controls implementation group 1, 2, and 3 and compared them to how good are we at creating protection or prevention in this case, against the attackers' processes and procedures for success. And how good are we at detecting what they're doing? Because sometimes you cannot build protection, but then you might be able to detect it and do something. So with the CIS controls, you can actually measure that very specifically and see that how good a protection do I get? And this is lined out for the different implementations group 1, 2, and 3 in this case. So I'm not going through the details, it will be part of the presentation. So with the CIS controls, you get a simplified approach to threat protection. You get 153 very specific controls. Sometimes it can sound very easy, but they are sometimes very complex. You can have some controls that are easy to do, and then there are other controls that are very complex to do, but also offer better protection. Then they comply with industry regulations, so a lot of people, they use it to comply with regulations that typically set some requirements, not controls, but requirements of how to protect. And in that way you can use the CIS controls to actually be compliant with industry regulations. We see that with GDPR, we see that with the NIS2 in Denmark right now. They're also good to achieve essential cyber hygiene because some of the controls are really simple cyber hygiene, like password length, password complexity, only use unique password, having a right configuration of the PC so you don't leave too many doors open and so forth. That is also built into the whole framework or control framework of CIS. And then of course it's a matter of translating information into action. So taking the controls that are, I would say, very prescriptive and turn them into actions within the operations of the company to make security happen. So with this, I wish you a safe and secure journey.